After the man went to the hospital to have 2 massive tumors removed, he got the news that shattered everything. It had all been a mistake. The cancer had already spread throughout his entire body. But here's the thing. He didn't rage. He didn't break down. Instead, he clutched the protection amulet his late wife had left behind, and he laughed. He laughed until tears ran down his face, because in his mind, only a death like this, alone, without children, without legacy, could ever begin to settle the debt he owed her soul. But then he opened his eyes, and what stared back at him was the character for happiness painted on the window of his childhood home, thick with dust and years of neglect. He blinked. His heart slammed in his chest. He was back. He frantically searched every corner of the house, and that's when he found her. Zhu, curled up on the clay bed, completely unclothed, her body telling a story no one should ever have to tell. What was once smooth, fair skin was now covered in deep purple bruises, crossing her body like wounds from a war she never asked to fight. Her large, beautiful eyes stared at him with a silence that was somehow more terrifying than any scream. The moment he saw her, the woman who had haunted his soul for half a lifetime, something inside him shattered completely. He rushed forward and wrapped his arms around her. He had so much to say, so much guilt, so much longing, but every single word got caught in his throat, and all that came out were broken, bitter sobs, because he remembered everything. In his past life, he had planned it. He engineered a situation where Zhu Yao fell into the reservoir, making the whole village see her disheveled and desperate, only for him to heroically pull her out. Her reputation destroyed, she had no choice but to marry him. But from the moment Zhu stepped into that house, not a single day of her life was good. Under the weight of his endless domestic violence, she eventually walked to that reservoir herself, this time with her child in her arms. It wasn't until his oldest brother-in-law pulled the bodies of mother and daughter from the water that the reality of what he'd done finally hit him. After that, he rode the waves of the era, built wealth he couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes, but the woman who had taught him what it meant to grow, she was gone, and no amount of money could ever bring her back. He was still processing the shock of being reborn when suddenly a piercing cry tore through the air. "Get away from me. Don't touch me." Zhu was trembling all over, her whole body recoiling from him, and then the memory hit him like ice water. He remembered now. Just recently, she had borrowed money from her family to buy rice porridge for their baby. He had taken it, spent it on alcohol, and then, drunk out of his mind, he had brutalized her. His eyes burned with tears. Without a word, he raised his hand and began slapping himself, hard, over and over, a dozen times. Blood trickled from the corners of his mouth. Zhu watched in complete silence, and then, slowly, a cold, bitter smile crossed her face. She had lost count of how many times she'd seen this exact scene play out. Every time he sobered up, he'd fall to his knees, beg for forgiveness, swear it would never happen again, and then within 2 days, his fists and feet would find her again. She could endure the humiliation, she could survive the pain, but what she could not bear, what broke something deep inside her, was the sound of her baby crying from hunger. That weak, desperate cry cut through everything, and somewhere in those beautiful phoenix eyes of Zhu, a tiny flame of life flickered back to life. She quickly pulled on her clothes and lifted her daughter into her arms, but her body was so malnourished that she could barely produce milk, and the baby kept crying, her wails echoing through the small house. That sound woke something in him too. He jumped up from the bed, grabbed his clothes off the floor, and headed for the door. "Wait, I'll go get something for our daughter to eat." He walked with long strides straight to the village store. Old man Juan, the shopkeeper, spotted him coming and flashed his yellow teeth with a knowing grin. "What kind of wine will it be this time?" the old man asked. "Put a bag of rice flour on my tab. I'll pay you back tomorrow." Old man Juan looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the swollen red mark burning on his cheek. He didn't say a word. He just turned, pulled a bag of rice flour off the shelf and handed it over. The man thanked him with genuine gratitude and rushed back home. When he stepped back into the room, Zhu was in the exact same position he had left her in. His heart dropped. He set down the rice flour and opened his mouth, but before he could speak, her voice came out quiet and cold as stone. "I'm warning you. Don't you dare sell my daughter. If you do, I'll curse your entire bloodline into extinction." He froze. The memory crashed over him like a wave. He had actually been planning to sell their daughter to a family in the village just to get money for liquor. The shame of it almost knocked him off his feet. "I swear, I will never sell our daughter. Tomorrow, I'm going to the village to find work." He stepped outside and stood in the fading light. Then he raised his hand and slapped himself again, hard, several more times, because if his memory was right, this was the very month that Zhu would walk into that reservoir with their daughter in her arms. That thought made his entire body run cold. The night was closing in, and there was nothing left to eat in the house, so 20 minutes later, he was at the foot of the back mountain, pulling the elastic band from his underwear to fashion a slingshot. Crack. A stone flew, a dove burst into the air, wings beating frantically. In his past life, after he'd made his fortune, he'd gotten into sport shooting. He even spent time with a slingshot. That old skill hadn't left him. He crouched in the grass for hours. By midday, he had trapped a pheasant in a net and knocked down several doves with the slingshot. The doves were small, 4 of them together barely made half a kilogram, but that pheasant, fat, heavy, a full 5 kilograms. He tied everything together with vines, hung them from a branch, and was just about to haul it all home when the weight suddenly disappeared. He spun around. The game was gone. His skin went cold. His hands started shaking. Had he just seen a ghost? Then a flash of light. It came from the peace amulet hanging against his chest, the same amulet his wife from his past life had always carried with her. It wasn't jade. It wasn't plastic. She had torn it off and thrown it at the edge of the reservoir the day she died. He stared at it, and the light faded. Hesitantly, he reached up and touched it. The next second, he stepped into a space. Small, no bigger than his hospital room. He tested it again and again, and slowly understood. Press the amulet, and you enter. Think about leaving, and you're out. With an ability like this, he could actually rebuild his life in this second chance. On the walk home, he passed houses that already had electric lights glowing in the windows, while his own family still relied on kerosene lamps. The worst years of the natural famine had barely passed, and even securing a single meal was never guaranteed. He walked straight to the kitchen and got to work. By the time full darkness had fallen, he carried a large bowl of dove soup into the main room and set it on the table. "Dinner's ready. I made dove soup. It'll help with your milk production." He called out 3 times. Finally, Zoo appeared slowly from the inner room. She spotted the steaming bowl on the table and didn't move toward it. She just stood there, her eyes filled with hatred and distrust. Looking at her and standing there in clothes held together by nothing but patches, his chest ached with a pain he couldn't put into words. In an era of such scarcity, Zhu Yao's beauty still managed to shine through all of it, and he had been a fool. He had won her and never once treasured her. Now, seeing the walls she'd built around herself, he understood. As long as he was standing in that room, she would not touch those chopsticks. "I'll eat in the kitchen." He turned and walked away. And for the first time in either of his lives, he did something right. Zhu stood completely still, staring at that big bowl of dove soup like she couldn't trust her own eyes. Was this a dream, or was this her last meal? Because for as long as she could remember, whenever there was food in the house, he always made sure to fill himself up first, leaving her with nothing but the water used to rinse the dishes. So even though her stomach was hollowed out from hunger, she didn't dare touch it. It wasn't until she stepped outside and spotted him, crouched by the window, quietly drinking his own portion of soup, and saw that large pheasant hanging at the kitchen entrance that everything clicked. He had gone hunting in the mountains. He had gone out and worked for this. Only then did Zhu walk back into the main room, pick up that bowl, and eat. When the meal was done, he washed every dish and utensil himself under the watchful, suspicious eyes of his wife. He had always been lazy. This was probably the first time in this household that he had ever done chores with any real intention. After finishing up, the weight of everything he'd done that day sat heavy on his chest. He heated a pot of water, carried it to the bedroom door, and said softly, "Yao, use this water to clean up." He set the basin down, turned around, and walked straight back out. Then he sat at the doorstep for a long time. After a while, the faint sound of water came from inside. He didn't go back in. He just tilted his head up and looked at the stars, already making plans for tomorrow. A real path forward, a legitimate one, because autumn was already here and winter was coming. Temperatures dropping to 20 degrees below zero, water freezing on contact. His wife and daughter needed padded cotton clothing. If he didn't move fast, they wouldn't survive it. When the sound of water stopped, he got up and stepped inside. The moment Zhu saw him appear, she flinched and stumbled back several steps. He stopped immediately. He cursed himself silently for what kind of monster he'd been, knowing full well that her fear wasn't something that would just disappear overnight, so he kept his voice low and calm. "I just came to get the basin, that's all." He picked it up off the floor and walked back out. Zhou didn't respond. The second he was through the door, she threw her clothes on as fast as she could. Out in the yard, he washed up quickly with the leftover warm water. After spending hours lying flat in the undergrowth hunting those doves, he needed it. He sat at the threshold afterward, letting his mind drift back through his past life. There was a time when some city folks had come wanting to forage in the mountains but were terrified of getting lost. They came to him, directionless, useless him, to guide them. Back then, he thought those city people had nothing better to do, but he'd watched carefully and learned their methods. He knew how to find and harvest wild herbs. He could do that now. Go out, collect them, sell them. That thought lit something up in him. He tied a torch together, grabbed whatever tools he could piece together, and called out toward the bedroom. "Yao, lock the door. I'm heading out for a bit." He was gone the entire night and didn't return until 4 in the morning. And honestly, some of it came down to luck. On his way down the mountain, he stumbled onto a civet den and managed to pull out several cubs that hadn't even opened their eyes yet. Back home, he processed them quickly and skillfully, left one in the kitchen, loaded 2 baskets, and headed straight for the village market. On market days, he found the busiest corner he could and laid everything out. The civet meat and pelts spread across his baskets. An elderly couple noticed him almost immediately. Seeing a young, sun-darkened kid with fresh mountain goods, they figured they'd treat themselves. By the time they left, they'd bought everything, including all the civet pelts, saying they wanted to make gloves for their young grandson. In less than 2 hours, every last bit was sold. Then he took the rhubarb he'd gathered the day before and walked into the village's traditional medicine shop. The moment the old pharmacist with the thick glasses laid eyes on it, he froze. He picked it up slowly, turned it over, examined it carefully, and then held out his hand, gesturing a price. The number made him frown. This old man was trying to play him like some naive mountain kid who didn't know any better. He reached out to take his goods back. The pharmacist grabbed his hand immediately. Now, if the price doesn't suit you, we can talk about it. He crossed his arms. 60 yuan, not a single bill less. I know what this piece is worth. I only cut it by accident, or it'd be valued even higher, but my wife and kids are going hungry at home, so I need the money today. After a beat, the pharmacist agreed. Deal done. With the money in hand, he went and bought meat and flour. He walked through 2 different co-ops before he finally tracked down powdered milk, practically a miracle to find in that era. Before heading home, he thought about the clothes Zhu had been wearing, the ones stitched together entirely from patches, and he stepped into the village's only small state-run clothing store. On the way back, he made a detour to visit an old hunter, a man well into his 70s. He handed over a pile of food in exchange for the old man's prized shotgun, the one he'd guarded like it was his own child. In those days, if you wanted meat, you needed ration coupons. The only way to eat freely was to get it yourself. As he was nearing home, he spotted Zhu in the fields, baby strapped to her back, working the land alone, and standing nearby, his older brother Zhu Zhensen turned the moment he saw him coming, face already twisting with anger. Where the hell have you been this time? You leave your wife to work the fields by herself? His eyes went wet before he could stop them. I went to the village to work, picked up some meat and flour on the way back. He steadied his voice. Tonight, bring your wife and the kids over for dinner. When his older brother heard that, he looked him up and down with clear suspicion, eyes dragging slowly from his face down to the dried mud caked across his pant legs. Then he glanced over at the basket his sister-in-law had prepared, full of corn buns she'd steamed at midday. Just have your wife take some home. We won't be coming for dinner. He paused, then added firmly, from now on, treat her right. There was nothing left to say. He nodded, picked up his things, and headed home. If he wanted to win his wife back, he had to start with her stomach, so he got to work in the kitchen. By the time dusk was settling in, Zhu came through the gate with a few corn buns tucked under her arm, but the moment she stepped into the yard, something stopped her. A smell, rich, warm, savory, the smell of meat coming from the kitchen. She moved toward the doorway and peered inside. There he was, hunched over the old clay stove, completely absorbed in what he was doing. Zhu had been on her feet in the fields all day. She was exhausted and starving. She set the corn buns aside and slipped into the bedroom to put their sleeping daughter in the cradle. But when she turned around, something on the table caught her eye. A tin of powdered milk. The blood rushed straight to her head. She stormed into the kitchen and slapped him across the face. Did you go and force money out of my mother again? How shameless can you be? The words hit him like a second slap, because he remembered he had actually done that, threatened his mother-in-law with a knife for money. The shame of it burned through him. I didn't. I earned it today. I swear. He reached into his pocket. That only made Zhu angrier. Before he could get a word in, she slapped him again. You think this is the time for that? Standing there after 2 slaps in a row, he genuinely didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Seeing that she had no intention of stopping, he quickly fished out 5 10-yuan bills he'd stashed in his waistband and shoved them into her hands. This is what I earned today. Take it. Keep it. Zhu stared at the bills pressed into her palm. The room seemed to tilt around her. Her legs wobbled. He instinctively reached out to steady her. She smacked his hand away hard. She couldn't process it. A lazy, useless man like him earning this much in a single day? What kind of dirty business was he running out there? He could see she didn't believe a single word. He was almost ready to drop to his knees right then and there. Yesterday, I went up the mountain and found wild dendrobium. I also stumbled onto a civet den. Sold everything for 60 yuan, spent 1 on food. What's in your hand is what's left. At the word dendrobium, something shifted behind Zhu's eyes. Dendrobium didn't grow just anywhere. It was deep in the mountains, rare, difficult to find even in daylight, let alone at night. But then again, there had been blood spots near the well that morning, and there had been civet meat stewing in the pot. Maybe she really had read this wrong. Still, how did he even know what dendrobium looked like? He met her hard stare without flinching. I haven't done anything wrong. If I'm lying, may I die without a single descendant. He watched her breathing slowly settle, watched the sharpness in her eyes soften just slightly. He exhaled. You, put that money somewhere safe. I'm going to take some meat over to my brothers. Let them have something fresh, too. He knew keeping the money in his hidden space would have been safer, but handing it to Zhu meant handing her something more important, authority over this household, and that was exactly where it belonged. He loaded up a plate of stir-fried civet meat alongside a pot of silver silver carp and tofu soup and set it on the table in the main room. Then he filled a separate bowl for his brother's family and headed out, stopping along the way to pay back old man Juan for the rice flour and to clear his old liquor debt too. Meanwhile, back home, Zhu stood in the bedroom staring at those bills in her palm. In over 2 years of marriage, money had only ever flowed one direction, out of her hands and into his. This was the first time he had ever voluntarily given her anything. She divided the bills into 5 separate portions and hid each one in a different place. When she came back out, something on the table stopped her. The food was still there, hot and steaming. She stood there for a moment, just staring. Then she went to check the kitchen. The water vat was nearly half full. The oil jar had been refilled, and hanging from the ceiling beam was a slab of pork belly, over 10 kilograms of it. He really has changed, but she couldn't be sure. Not yet. A dog doesn't just stop being a dog. When he got back and noticed she hadn't touched her food, he quietly placed a pheasant leg on her plate without saying a word. "I'm heading up the mountain early tomorrow. While winter hasn't hit yet, I need to cover every spot where dendrobium might grow. It's the fastest way to make real money right now. And when things open up in this country, I can put that money into something bigger." Zhao blinked at him, then gave a slow nod. She didn't say anything, but inside, she was thinking, last night was a lucky accident. You can't build a life on luck. What she wanted to tell him was to find a proper job. Even a few coins a day beat nothing. But knowing his personality, as long as he wasn't out gambling and drinking himself into a stupor, she'd let him do what he wanted. He picked up his chopsticks and moved to give the pheasant leg back to her plate. She stopped him quickly, using the baby as her cover. "You're too thin. Eat more. If you don't, the baby won't have enough milk. And no matter how good powdered milk is, it's not the same, and it's expensive and hard to find. This carp and tofu soup, drink it. It'll help your supply." Zhu shot him a sharp look. The knuckles wrapped around her chopsticks went white, but she didn't refuse. He had been going since before dawn. His body was running on empty. The food situation, the most pressing crisis in this family, was finally for the first time under control. The moment his stomach was full, he stood up and said plainly, "Wife, I'm going to sleep." He ducked through the inner doorway, lay down, and was out cold before his head had barely touched the pillow. By the time Zhu finished washing the dishes and came back to the room, she found the clothes he'd stripped off lying on the floor. She frowned, then she picked them up and washed them by moonlight outside. When she finally dragged her exhausted body back to the bedroom, her foot knocked against something on the floor. She picked it up. It was a bundle of clothing, a full set of women's wear, new, and 3 small sets of baby clothes. She looked up slowly at him, already deep in a dead sleep, and stared for a long moment. "This person, I don't understand him anymore. You slept so deeply that night that your daughter woke up twice and couldn't rouse you either time. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that your eyes finally dragged open. You rolled over, and there was Zhu curled up with her back to you, wearing nothing but an old worn-out undershirt. After a lifetime of absence, just the sight of her made your chest ache with longing. In your past life, after Zhu was gone, you had never been with another woman, not once, so without thinking, you reached out and pulled her close. It felt unreal, like something out of a dream. You leaned in, and then her whole body went rigid in your arms. A silent, full-body rejection. You stopped. You pulled back the feeling rising in your chest, sat up, and got out of bed. Not yet. You have to earn this. You grabbed your clothes from the drying rack, still damp, but you put them on anyway, then tiptoed out and set what you'd been saving onto the table. That's when Zhu sat up in bed, her expression cool and composed. "If you actually want to change, find a job while you're motivated. 1 month of honest work and you could make over 10 yuan, enough to keep this family afloat." His heart jumped. She was talking to him, voluntarily. That alone meant something, but he couldn't explain to her what he knew, that this country was about to open up, that the window to build real capital was narrow, and that right now, hunting and gathering dendrobium was the fastest path to getting there. In his past life, after losing everything, he drifted like a stray dog until a kind stranger gave him a chance clerking in a state-run store. He charmed his way up to manager, made the right connection, and eventually built an empire. But this time, he wasn't going to wait for someone else to hand him an opportunity. He just couldn't explain any of that to Zhu. Not yet. He watched him go quiet and distant and recognized the look immediately. He'd made up his mind, and nothing was going to move him. He pulled the blanket back over herself and lay down. "There are corn buns in the kitchen for you." His eyebrows shot up. A grin spread across his face before he could stop it. He walked over to the bed and pressed a quick kiss to Zhu's cheek. "Yao, I already talked to my older brother yesterday. You don't have to go help them today." Then he leaned down and kissed his daughter too, and by the time Zhu fully registered what had just happened, he was already gone. The dark room was quiet, just her and her sleeping baby. It was still early, but she lay there turning everything over in her mind, unable to fall back asleep. Eventually the sun warmed the walls, and then came a knock at the door. It was her second sister-in-law, Lu, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fourth sister-in-law, up so early. Anything going on?" Then, without waiting for an answer, those eyes slid sideways toward the kitchen. "I heard from the oldest sister-in-law that you all had meat last night. Don't tell me your husband won big gambling." Before Zhu could even open her mouth, Liu's feet were already carrying her straight to the kitchen entrance, as if they had their own agenda. "Lord have mercy. A piece of meat that size? Did your husband steal it? How much did that cost?" Their family hadn't tasted meat in nearly half a year. Their own child had been crying for days over it, and she hadn't bought any. Liu's eyes swept the kitchen hungrily, and then spotted half a wild pheasant hanging on the wall. Whatever composure she was maintaining collapsed instantly. "Fourth sister-in-law, you'd better keep a close eye on that husband of yours. Gambling leads nowhere good. He could end up in prison." Zhu's eyes narrowed slowly. "Second sister-in-law, if he commits a crime, the police will deal with it. You don't need to worry yourself." Liu opened her mouth, then something flickered behind her eyes, and she swallowed whatever she'd been about to say. Her tone shifted to something softer, almost wounded. "Don't be upset with me. I just worry about our fourth brother. He and my husband are blood after all." "A beat. My little one's been crying for meat every day. Could you lend me 5 kilograms? I'll have your second brother bring the money over." After 2 years of living near this woman, Zhu knew exactly how this worked. Whatever went into Liu's house never came back out. He wasn't going to lend 5 kilograms of meat to anyone, and even if she had the authority to, she wouldn't dare make a decision that big alone. "Something this important isn't mine to decide, second sister-in-law. Wait until the fourth gets home and ask him yourself." She shut the kitchen door firmly. Liu's painted smile finally gave up the act. "Fine. When fourth brother gets back, don't forget to tell him to bring the meat to my house." He left, the pretense completely gone. Up on the mountain, it was almost noon. Guided by memories from his past life, it had taken most of the morning, but he finally found what he was looking for. A wild dendrobium, and this one far larger than he worked carefully, patiently, till the sky began dim and the full root system finally free. He cradled it like something precious. He was just turning to head back down rows. A spotted deer stood in the path ahead of him, probably drawn by the scent of the herb. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he reached quickly into the hidden space and pulled out the old hunter's shotgun. The shot cracked through the forest like thunder. Birds exploded from every tree in every direction. Back home, Zhu had dinner ready and her daughter fed. He kept glancing at the door, frowning. Wild herbs aren't that easy to find. He'd be better off learning a real trade. She was still thinking it when she heard movement in the yard. She came out with the baby in her arms and found him already there, quietly unloading his basket. "Wash your hands, come eat." She went back inside. She'd glanced at the basket. She'd seen what was in it, but she said nothing. When he stepped through the door and saw the table full of steaming food, his eyes went warm. "Also, we're getting electricity installed in the house these next few days." Zhu paused mid-stroke, petting the baby. She looked up carefully. "Electricity means a monthly bill?" She said it, watching him from the side, bracing herself, waiting to see if he'd flip the table over her words. He caught her expression immediately. He set down his chopsticks, got up, went to the door, and carried the basket inside. "Wife, look at what I dug today. I'll take it to the city pharmacy another day. It'll fetch a good price." Zhu stared at the plant, then slowly looked back up at him. "You actually dug this yourself? I swear I didn't steal it. That's a full day's work on that mountain. Every bit of it." She studied his face. It was calm, steady. She gave a slow, uncertain nod. "Our second sister-in-law came today. Wanted to borrow 5 kilograms of pork." The look on her face told him everything. She was angry. He'd been gone, and that woman had come in here and made her uncomfortable in her own home. He set down his chopsticks and looked at her squarely. "From now on, you run this house. The money, the food, all of it is under your control. If you don't want to lend something, we don't lend it. No discussion." Something tightened in Zhu's chest. It wasn't the first time things had been borrowed from this house and never returned. But hearing him say it out loud, hand the power directly to her, she didn't know how to hold that. He saw the look on her face and smiled. He reached over and gently tapped the tip of her nose. "If you don't want to lend it, we don't. We're not putting up with anyone's attitude." Zhao stared at him, then quietly picked up her daughter and disappeared into the inner room. He finished his meal, washed every dish and pair of chopsticks himself, then cut half a jin of meat and headed out into the dark. The village chief, Huan Xuanzu, answered the door. His weathered face went from surprise to pleased the moment he saw the meat. "Zhao Gun, what brings you to me this late? I want to get electricity put into my house. If you have time, help me arrange it. Consider it done. I'll get on it first thing tomorrow." He thanked him, turned, and headed home. But as he passed the kitchen, he stopped. There was Zhu, crouched in the dark kitchen, quietly gnawing on the bones he had left behind. The sight hit him like a blade to the chest. Every drop of blood in his body seemed to freeze. "What are you doing?" Zhu startled so hard the bone flew from her hand and clattered to the floor. She stumbled back, voice shaking with fear. "Don't hit me. They're just the bones you left. I thought it was a waste to throw them away." It felt like lightning striking him from inside. He had never, not once in either life, felt so utterly defeated by himself. He dropped to his knees right there in front of her. Zhu let out a frightened cry. What are you doing?" She stood trembling, looking down at the man kneeling before her in the dark kitchen. And then she felt it, the warmth of tears soaking through her clothes, spreading slowly against her chest. He was crying. The man who had spent years being nothing but a source of pain and fear was on his knees in a dark kitchen sobbing, and something in Zhu's chest, that wall she had built brick by brick out of necessity and survival, loosened just slightly. Because watching her flinch in terror over eating the scraps he had left behind, That image drove itself into him like a knife he couldn't pull out. He rose from the floor, and with trembling hands, he gently held her face on those pale, soft cheeks, leaned in, and kissed the tears from the corners of her eyes. "Go to the inner room and wait. When the food is ready, I'll bring it to you. You are my greatest blessing." Zhu had no idea what those words meant, but her face went red as if she'd seen a ghost, and she fled the kitchen. He cooked. Tender stir-fried meat came off the pan, and he brought it straight to her. His own throat was raw. He'd been forcing down coarse grain all day, but she deserved every last bite. When he stepped into the inner room to bring it to her, he stopped. Her back was turned, and it was beautiful. Without thinking, he crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Don't leave me again." He murmured it into her hair, and for the first time since they'd been married, Zhu felt something she didn't have a word for, something warm and entirely unfamiliar. She lay still. Her cheeks burned, and somewhere in the night, without either of them meaning for it to happen, they fell asleep closer than they had ever been. When morning light crept in, Zhu's eyes snapped open and went straight to the baby's cradle. She hadn't heard her daughter cry once through the night. Panic hit her like cold water. She went white, but before she could even move, he was already up, already across the room, already looking into the cradle. Their daughter lay there wide awake, staring up at him with two enormous eyes and a gummy smile that could stop time. He picked her up with such careful, clumsy tenderness that something in Zhu's chest cracked open. The terror drained out of her slowly, and then her eyes went red. She almost started crying right there. How had she slept so deeply? What if something had happened? This baby was so small, so fragile. "Stay in bed a little longer, wife." Zhu sat up and checked the diaper. It was clean, changed, though unevenly, clearly by hands that didn't know what they were doing. So he'd gotten up in the night to take care of her. In the entire time since their daughter had been born, he had never once done that, not once. And now here he was. Maybe he really has changed. Maybe I can trust this. By the time she came out of the room with the baby in her arms, breakfast was already on the table. Tofu, greens, corn porridge, mixed grain buns. He stood in the doorway shirtless, reached out and took the baby straight from her arms. "Go wash your hands first." Zhu looked at him. This big man holding such a tiny baby like she might shatter, and despite everything, a small laugh escaped her. "She's your own daughter, not a tiger. She's not going to bite you." They were still eating when the village chief Huan Zhu arrived at the gate with an electrician in tow. He stopped at the site in the courtyard, Zhu sitting at the table eating, and her husband wandering around shirtless with the baby. Then the chief's eyes landed on a neat row of bite marks on the inside of his arm, and a knowing grin spread across his weathered face. "Zhaogun, still haven't finished eating?" He guided the chief and the electrician outside the gate to talk, then came back in long enough to hand the baby to Zhao before pulling a pack of cigarettes from his loose pants pocket. The chief looked at the brand and laughed, showing off his yellow teeth. "You're still a rascal, but you've improved. That pack costs 40 cents. The electrician smiled quietly, tucked his cigarette behind his ear, hoisted his ladder, and got to work. 40 cents a pack, more than he ever bought for himself. This family was generous. It was worth the trip. When the electricity was connected, he came back inside, and his shirt sailed straight at his face. "Put some clothes on. What do you look like walking around like that?" What she couldn't say, not in front of the men, was that his back was covered in scratches. Her scratches from the night before. The chief and the electrician had both seen them. Neither said a word, but Zhu had wanted to sink into the earth. She waited until he'd headed back up the mountain before pressing her burning cheek into her hands and taking a long moment to compose herself. Then she stripped the bed and got to work washing the sheets. She just set the baby in the courtyard cradle and filled the washing basin when she heard the gate. Her mother walked in carrying a basket, eggs, and a small piece of meat. "Mama, what are you doing here?" Her mother didn't answer right away. She walked the basket into the kitchen, then turned and looked her daughter up and down. The old, ill-fitting clothes, the thinness, her eyes filled instantly. She looked away fast, picked her granddaughter up from the cradle, and kept her voice steady. "I finished up at home, came to see you," but her eyes were moving, taking in the 3 crumbling adobe and thatch rooms, the low ceilings, the dust, the cobwebs, and her heart was doing what it had been doing for 2 years, reproaching itself for agreeing to this marriage, for what she'd done to her daughter's life. "Yao," her voice dropped. "I've been thinking, if you truly cannot go on with him, divorce him. You're young. There's so much life ahead of you. Don't waste it on a man like that." Zhu went still. She sat down on the bench and said nothing for a long moment. She thought about that day, the day he took the money she'd borrowed from her own family to buy porridge for the baby and spent every last coin on alcohol. The hopelessness that had swallowed her whole. How she had stood at the edge of the reservoir, her daughter in her arms, thinking it was the only way out, and then how he'd sobered up and slapped himself bloody with regret before running to buy the porridge himself. But these past few days, he wasn't going out out to idle. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't gambling. He was working, bringing home food, handing her money, getting up in the night with the baby. Mama, Zhu looked up. I'm not thinking about divorce right now. He's changing. Slowly, but he is. She pulled at the edge of her daughter's new clothes, the ones he had bought. He bought me a set too. I just haven't worn it yet. Her mother stared at her. Something in Zhu's face was different. A color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in a long time. A light, faint but real, returning to her eyes. She didn't mention what she'd overheard the day before, that her son-in-law owed 50 yuan to a stranger, a debt that size. She had no idea how they'd repay it. That fear had driven her here this morning, but looking at her daughter's face now, it didn't look like someone performing. It looked real. She steadied herself, blinked back tears. If he can truly change, then I can rest easy. Up on the mountain, he had 2 cigarette butts dangling from his lip, completely unaware that his mother-in-law had almost taken his wife away from him this morning. He was doing math in his head, current dendrobium prices, cost of materials, calculating how long before he could build a proper 2-story house. Even after construction, he'd still have solid savings left. Not many families in this era had 10,000 yuan. He knew he'd be in the village a few more years yet, so the first priority was the house. Those 3 adobe rooms barely let him stand up straight when he walked in. Dust everywhere, cobwebs on everything. That was no place to raise a family. He had no idea what had almost happened while he was gone. And honestly, if he had known, he probably wouldn't have been able to drag himself up the mountain for days, because he understood now, more than anything, money could wait. Methods from his past life weren't going anywhere. There was no rush. Nothing was worth more than Zhu and their daughter. At noon, Zhu's mother hadn't eaten. She hurried to leave, afraid that every bite she took was one less for her daughter. Zhu tried to stop her, then went straight to the kitchen, lifted the hanging meat, and cut off more than half of it. She chased her mother down the road. Mama, take this for my brother and his wife. Her mother turned and saw the size of the piece and immediately started waving it away. She was afraid that if her son-in-law found out she'd taken food from his house, he'd take it out on Zhou, afraid her daughter would go without. Keep it. Eat it yourselves. Look at you. You're all bones. You need to eat. How is the baby going to get any milk otherwise? She left without taking the meat, and Zhu stood there in the road, holding it, watching her mother go.